the first time that I ever stepped through the doors at WBUR, I was a grad student, and I volunteered to answer phones for a pledge drive, which was actually quite amazing because I didn't really have enough money to give as much as I wanted, and I was a constant BUR listener, and so I came to volunteer, and I heard from people all over saying, I'm going to give $5, I'm going to give more than that, whatever they could, and the passion that they had, I was like, oh, these are my people, I feel the same way. And so the fact that you are here, it's not just what we say in life that shows what our values are, it's how we walk through the world. And so the fact that you decided to walk in here today, in addition to your membership for however long it's lasted, it really does mean everything to us. The public service aspect of our public service journalism is our core mission, and I'm always really gratified to be able to meet members of the public. So I just wanted to say that and thank you so very much, and also encourage you to do the questions. This is your chance. So this is not necessarily an AMA, but as close to an AMA as we can make it. But
yeah, so
go ahead, Jonathan.
So when people find out what I do for work, they always say, "Isn't Meghna amazing?" I'm like, "Yes, she actually is." and then it's like, how do you come up with those shows? So I thought what we'd do is spend a bit of time talking about actually a couple of series that we did, one last year, one this year, how they came about. And at the end, we'll do some questions, and please do go on Slido. On Point now has a hashtag. I stole that joke from you last night. And go ahead and ask your questions. And so the first series that we're going to talk about, we did last year. We called it Elements of Energy. I'll tell you why we came up with that title in a couple of minutes. It was really about the minerals, essential as we're inevitably move away from fossil fuels. And again, this audio they're about to hear, it's from last year, and it's very obviously from last year.
I've signed a historic piece of legislation here in the United States that includes the biggest, most important climate commitment we have ever made in the history of our country.
President Biden set the goal: cut U.S. carbon emissions in half by 2030.
So let this be the moment we find within ourselves the will to unlock a resilient, sustainable, clean energy economy to preserve our planet.
Achieving that goal will require vast amounts of lithium.
This lithium deposit is one of the richest ones in North America.
Copper.
We are at probably an inflection point in the annual demand for copper.
Cobalt.
The only way to survive in that part of the Congo is to pick up a strip of rebar or their bare hands and start digging in pits for cobalt, because it's everywhere.
Nickel.
And if you're looking at a Ford F-150 Lightning, we're looking, I think, almost at about 180 pounds of just nickel in that battery.
Each element serves a different purpose, but they all have one important thing in common.
Without mining, there will not be a clean energy transition.
But increasing mining to meet our clean energy needs comes at a cost.
If we're going to be using these materials, we need to, first of all, be honest with ourselves and be more aware.
Especially if you look at the environmental and social costs of becoming a smelting and mining and battery hub to the world.
It's not up to you to decide what to do with this land. This is their land. This is their ancestral land, and they don't want this to happen.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarti, and this is an On Point special series.
There is no math about the new demand for these minerals.
All the mining companies, they're billionaires, and we're still poor, destitute, struggling.
The most negative story you could tell, the worst assumptions you could project.
To take the lithium out of this ground is another form of genocide or cultural genocide.
Still, it's going to be a vast, vast, vast improvement on the ongoing apocalypse that is the fossil fuel economy.
Elements of Energy, mining for a green future.
So while the framing and the political framing may sound very pre-Trumpian, nevertheless, those four elements that we spoke about, that you just heard about, they are still geopolitically very essential. In fact, Jake Sullivan, who was in that chair last night when Meghna was in this chair, spoke about it, just how essentially they are. There's a geopolitical fight over these minerals, and they are essential.
A national security focus on the
Absolutely.
minerals, yeah.
So what you heard in that we had, which we call the topper, which we put in the top of each show, was the 4 distinct minerals, the stories that we were going to tell behind them, very structured. So the idea for that show came about. We'd done a couple of shows about mining on the moon and mining the deep sea oceans. And after one of these shows, Meghna and I were just talking. I said, what about if we did like a week of episodes where we did a different mineral each day and they told a different story? And she said, yes, let's do it. And I was like, oh, I just made that up. I just made that up. Like, I don't know that there are 5 minerals with 5 stories to tell. So I then had to go and do my actual research and realized that there were, and decided what those minerals were. And they got assigned out to different producers through our senior editor, Dori Scheimer, who looks after the special series that we do. And that's really when they began their work, months, in fact, before the series ran. I wonder if, Meghna, as a former producer yourself, you want to speak about the work that goes into that.
Yeah, people often ask me, like, how do you know as much as you know? And I'm like, I don't. Our producers do, because they are masterful at research and digging up information. And that is, I was telling someone a little bit earlier that they're like the radio version of the coolest librarian, right? They just kind of know where everything is. Librarians know where like all the information is in the library. Producers know like who to talk to in the world to get good information to put in the show. So that's what they did. We sort of roughly, after Jonathan said, well, here seem to be the 4 main minerals that are really essential for the clean energy future, the individual producers went out and spent weeks just researching and talking to people and then having them suggest who else they should talk to and recording interviews and digging up. I love reading like scientific papers along with like reported stories and other studies. So they were like digging up original sources about each one of these minerals.
You said digging up for the minerals. So.
You'll hear in just a moment how Jonathan and I have a competition of who can be most didactic. But anyway, so that's what they do. Like they are truly sort of the brains that vacuum up the information from the world, and then we come together and we try to figure out like how can we distill this in a way that helps us understand, something new about this issue. And so that for a series like this, that research part takes quite some time. And as Jonathan said, I was a producer in my first 5 years of my journalism experience, and I loved it. It was like it was one of the reasons why I just fell in love with journalism, because you get to go out and you get to be a student, right? And the smartest people in the world, like, are willing to talk to you. I was 25 when I started, and I remember calling people up and being like, "Hi, I'm a producer on this show on public radio," and they're like, "Oh yeah, WBUR, I love WBUR," and I'm like, "You just won the Nobel Prize." But they would talk to me, so it's a real thrill. It's a real thrill, like intellectual and emotional thrill. But they brought all that information back, and then we shaped the series.
I will say this happens not infrequently. Well, I'll call someone up and say, "Hi, I'm executive producer of this show called On Point," and they will interrupt and go like, "I'm a Meghna superfan." So anyway, back to the mineral series. So we ended up dropping down to 4 minerals to tell 4 stories: environment, human rights, geopolitics, economics, because we wanted to make the last episode about how it really was essential, that the U.S. role in the geopolitical fight for these minerals. And when we produced that particular series, as you listen to the show every day, you'll notice it's mostly all live with some produced elements. The mineral series had more sort of produced elements, and I'm going to stop calling it the mineral series now. We end up calling it Elements of Energy, because there was one meeting where we're sitting, having many meetings that this series involved, and Meghna and I are sitting across this conference room table from each other, and she folds her hands like this, and she glares at me and she goes, "Lithium's not a mineral, it's an element." So
Told you, didactic.
Yeah. Though usually I'm usually going for gold. But anyway, in this, our senior editor Dory Scheimer came up with the elements of energy mining for a green future title.
Well, one of the reasons why I did that is because look around. The listeners out there, they're smart. They would have been like, that is not a mineral. Nickel is Ni on the periodic table. It is not a mineral. Can't let them down, Jonathan. Our meetings are
Meghna
fun.
has 3 degrees, right? Mine is in English, so yeah. So anyway, I mentioned mix between highly produced and live. So we would want to play an example now of one of the produced elements that went into the show, and then we're going to have Meghna speak about the editing process.
It's killing the clams. The sediment buries them. We found one area where the sediment exceeded 1 meter in the year 2021 alone.
Bukan cuma berdampak, membunuh sebenarnya.
Baduha's 2014 discovery came precisely the same year that then Indonesian President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono approved a total ban on mineral ore exports out of the country. It shook up the global nickel industry, and since then, the hills and rainforests surrounding Sulawesi's coastline have been razed for new nickel mines and processing facilities. Yeah, so that was obviously the episode about nickel, which we focused in Indonesia because I still think it's one of the world's largest nickel producers. And so what happens is in these produced pieces, our producers go out and sometimes, very rarely, I get to do the original sort of not live interview. So they're doing those interviews and they come back and they say, here's this voice and here's that voice and here are these facts. And they will actually write up a first draft of the story. And then they give it to me and usually I just rewrite the whole thing. But that doesn't mean they did a bad job, right? It's just that that is the editing process. I'm taking their original material and refining it. And then there's a lot of back and forth in those rewrites. Sometimes it happens over the course of the day.
Some of the conversations that you have.
Yeah, sometimes it happens over the course of the day. Sometimes when we have more time, it's over many days or weeks. So do we have those slides of some of the back and forth? Yeah, so these are just a few of we work in a Google Doc of the questions I was asking Dan, who produced this episode really well. And so our producers are excellent. So I'm never worried that they're misrepresenting anything or they're sort of missing a big idea. I get to dig down into, just like kind of brutal fact checking or restructuring. And this is just a little bit of the back and forth that happens. We go back and forth on everything from, okay, we're talking about a coastline. Well, how many miles is that coastline? Which part, north, south, east, west on the coastline? The date of this fire was X, but I can't find any reference to if it was this exact plant, that kind of thing, in terms of the fact checking. And then there's also just kind of giant structuring to be sure that the piece achieves its goal, right? Because these pieces are one part of a whole hour. And the goal usually for these is to really set up the context, in this case, the geographic and political context in Indonesia, so that the rest of the analysis that follows, listeners have, now a foundation upon which to understand the analysis better. So that is a very rigorous process between the producers and me, and we have a lot of fun doing it. I have a lot of fun doing it.
And getting it right is really important, sometimes in more challenging ways. Yeah. We have a little clip to play.
Baduha's 2014 discovery came precisely the same year that then Indonesian President Susilo Bambang, oh my God, Meghna. Obviously I have to read this 8 million times. Okay. Then Indonesian President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono. Or is it it's like Yudhoyono. Yudhoyono. Okay, thank you. One more time. These tracks for all this week are going in the host can't pronounce things Hall of Fame. Yudhoyono. Oh my God. I'm gonna have to do that all again. You would think that someone with a name like mine would have an easier time in pronouncing words in international tongues, but no. Okay, 2, 1. Then Indonesian President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono approved a total ban on mineral ore exports out of the country.
Round of applause, please.
That was not all of the retakes I had to do for the Indonesian president's name. We spared you the 3rd, 4th, and 5th minute of that.
15?
15, yeah, I don't even remember now.
So we spoke about pre-produced elements, but the show most days, and that particular series, is still fundamentally live. And to support Meghna when she's in the studio, there's a thing called a packet, which is where all the producers' research notes go. The producers will do pre-interviews with multiple people. Sometimes the guest that you've heard on the air is the 3rd or 4th potential guest that the producer's gone to before they decide on the right one. But the producers pre-interview them all, and all those pre-interviews are transcribed so that Meghna has as many sources as she can to do her research, as well as multiple articles and readings that the producer has selected for her. And then there's the outline, which is what the producer and Meghna have determined, along with myself often, is what should happen in each of the 3 segments of the show. I think we've got a visual of an outline here, and you can speak about how important that is to you and how you use that.
This is one. Oh, right. This is actually from the Elements series.
It
okay,
is.
Correct. So I personally believe that every hour of On Point, its success or failure is determined before we get on the air. And it's determined by this document. Because Jonathan, me, and the producers, we spend a lot of time talking through, first of all, what is the goal of this hour? How are we going to make it worth your time to spend an hour with us so that you come out the other end thinking that wasn't a waste of your life that you're never going to get back? And so we work a lot on the intellectual structure of the show. And we essentially, you'll see in this outline, it's like, what are the concepts that we need to present or the concepts that we need to question at each point in the show? They're kind of like mile markers. Very infrequently will we have specific questions written out. We'll only do that if like every word of the question needs to be spot on, if it's going to be a difficult guest, for example. But it's more like here are the mile markers that we need to hit so that the hour progresses in a way that kind of intellectually builds on itself. So that's what this outline is. And I follow it pretty closely. The actual questions that come out of my mouth really actually depend on what the guest is saying at that moment, because I really don't like it when you can hear a host clearly not listening to the person they're talking to and just wanting to get to the next question.
You'll notice there are no questions in this outline.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. There's the concepts, and this is like the first couple of pages of the big packet that I get every day for every show. And then sometimes things unexpected happen. Like a guest will say something, and I'll be like, "What?" And so we go this direction, and we go essentially off the outline. But that's what happens. That's part of the thrill of live radio for me. But as you see here, the thought and the intention of the show is really hammered out. And by the time we hit the start of the live program, 99% of the work is done. So when you hear me, you're literally hearing the last 1% of work that a very talented staff have done the vast majority of beforehand. And behind this in the packet, by the way, there's like all the major articles, there's the transcripts that Jonathan was talking about, studies. I go through the night before and read it and highlight it, and sometimes I'm just like cross-checking with other sources that I know about, and I'll stick those notes in the packet. So people think I know a lot. I have incredible like encyclopedic documents in front of me and a screen in the booth, which I am referencing as we do the conversations.
So that was last year's series, Elements of Energy. This year, our big landmark series, we try to have like one big landmark series and several smaller ones every year. This year's landmark series was called Falling Behind, the Miseducation of America's Boys. And this was Meghna's idea. And Meghna will speak about how this idea came about and was presented to us, which was very, very differently from how the Elements Energy series came about. But let's hear, again, you heard the topper for the Elements series. Let's hear the topper now for Falling Behind.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Mr. Y'all ready to have a good day today?
Yes! I'm Meghna Chakrabarti. This is an on-point special series, Falling Behind, the Miseducation of America's Boys.
The ways that school doesn't work for lots of boys comes with a higher penalty.
He calls it 6 cruel hours of our lives, an acronym for school.
The data would show that we're failing them desperately.
Hey, yo, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
If you have a teacher who tells you, you're really badly behaved and sends you all these messages that you're not going to do well, it turns out there's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy there.
1, 2, 3. All right, number 5.
As a first grade teacher, relationships with the boys became a window into what I argue now is a need for the reimagining of Black boyhood.
Just because your skin color think that you condone violence, because they see other Black children on the news condoning violence, killing, it brings you down.
One thing I do with my class is I always ask them if they can remember the time when they were first told that boys don't cry, and 100% of them can do it.
As men, we're in jail with our emotions, we can't let them out. It just sucks.
The quote actually comes from Frederick Douglass. It's easier to build strong boys than rebuild broken men. Today's boys are tomorrow's men.
So, a couple of years ago, 2, maybe 3, what is time? We interviewed Richard Reeves, and he had just written a book on boys and men. And it was about sort of the increasing evidence that in a number of measures of American life, boys and men are falling behind. And at that time, I was utterly fascinated by it because it's not something that people are entirely unaware of. But he pulled together all the data. And after that show, again, this is a couple of years ago, I got an interesting sort of mix of responses. Some from, especially parents, interestingly moms, who said, yeah, my son is having a different experience than my daughter did. And then I got a lot of other responses from people saying, I cannot believe you just did an hour about men. White male privilege, toxic masculinity, these are all things that men are they're the cause of all the problems in the world. What a waste of an hour. You're a terrible journalist. And I was like, okay. But what Richard had said really stuck with me. Full disclosure, I have a son. I have a 15-year-old daughter and an almost 11-year-old son. And in the intervening 2 years, I also noticed that my son was having a different experience. So I called up Richard. This is before I talked to Jonathan. Called up Richard, who now runs the American Institute for Men and Boys. He's dedicated his life to this now. And I was like, hey, Richard, I kind of have noticed this thing. Is it a thing? And he goes, oh, it's a thing. In that every day, moms especially are calling the American Institute for Boys and Men and saying something is not right with my son's experience. Not necessarily not right with my son, but not right with his experience. And so he and I talked for an hour or so. And I said, I want to do a series about that. I really want to do a series. So with that background, and I read a bunch of stuff, I came to Jonathan. I'm like, I want to do a series about boys. Here it is. And I presented the whole thing. And what was interesting, I'll just jump ahead a tiny bit, in that after the first time we ran this boys series, the response that came into my inbox from listeners was completely different. There was 1 or 2 of whatever, they're going to grow up to be men and they'll earn more money than women. But 99% of it was some of them were from men who were like, I am so glad that we can actually talk about this because that's how my life was and that's how my son's life is. And a lot of them, again, were from moms who were saying, and teachers actually, who were saying, we need to talk about this more. I don't know why, but my son's going down this particular path, and no matter what we do, so the response was utterly different. And since then, sorry, I'm going on and on. I just really love this series, but since then, we can't take credit for like sort of lofting this in the public consciousness. That's really Richard. But there has been a lot more journalistic coverage of this issue of men in general, let alone boys falling behind. The New York Times is doing an ongoing series. I saw a thing on CNN, et cetera, et cetera. So we're pretty proud of sort of capturing this like right at the beginning of its sort of reemergence into the public consciousness of the importance of, you can continue to support strongly women and girls in their advancement while also saying the other 50% of this country, we can't just presume that everything's going to be okay because, as that last voice said, they become tomorrow's men. So that seems to be something a lot more people are thinking about, and we're really glad to have been part of that conversation.
Cool. I just want to remind people at this point that we can take questions. If you have questions for Meghna, Slido.com, pull out your phone, #OnPoint. And so this particular episode, this particular series, it was the most highly produced that we've ever undertaken. It was actually entirely pre-taped. Every episode we taped longer than it was actually broadcast, and then it would be cut down. It had many more produced elements. And it was just really ambitious at the time. For both series, for both the Elements of Energy and the Falling Behind, we're still doing the regular show, Monday through Friday. And the producer doing the regular show and working on these deeply ambitious series at the same time. I had Claire Donnelly, who produced the first episode in the series. I had to calculate just how many hours had gone into that 1 hour. And she totted up between all the meetings and the pre-records and the edits, 60 hours just on 1 hour of the radio that you have, as well as doing the regular show. We do have an amazing team, a really dedicated team. So one of the goals that we asked each producer for their episode, because we have, on a good day, 5 producers for 5 shows. So we asked each producer for their show, because the way On Point works is a producer gets a show that they work deeply on. We said that we wanted each episode of this series to take us inside a classroom. So for 2 of the shows, Meghna was actually able to go down to Pittsburgh, right, and visit 2 different schools for 2 different episodes. Fortunately, they were in the same city. And really makes a difference getting inside the classroom. And for the first episode, producer Claire Donnelly, who I mentioned, took us inside Louis Lancho's classroom. Louis Lancho teaches 5th grade at Highland Elementary in Palm Beach County, Florida. You heard a bit of the audio from his classroom at the opening to the show. You can hear a little bit more now.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Y'all ready to have a good day today?
Yeah! When I'm working with boys specifically, I love to do teamwork. They're very good at working with one another and creating things. I mean, so are the girls as well. But one of the learning strategies that we do is called the huddle.
Are you guys ready for a huddle?
Yeah!
All right, good. Okay, so this is the first thing that you're gonna do. But I have a question up on the board. We're gonna read the question first. Then you're gonna answer the question, and then we're gonna go up and get into partners in our huddle group. Deal?
Yes.
All right, so everyone, let's go ahead and let's read the question. 1, 2, 3.
How does Buck respond to his new life in Alaska? We ask a specific question, and we would like a written response, correct?
All right, so what you're gonna do right now is you're going to give me 2 ways that Buck responds to all the conflict that he faces in Alaska. And then every time you have a conflict and the way he responds, you're going to get a piece of the text as your evidence. Capiche?
Capiche.
They were reading Call of the Wild.
Yeah. So when our chief content officer I'm going to call him Brilliant Chief Content Officer because he's somewhere in the room, heard that. He said to me, who produced that? I said, Claire. He said, you sent Claire down to Florida? I said, no. He said, so you had some freelancer go and record that? I went, no. He said, so how did you get that quality audio inside Louis Lancho's classroom? And I was like, Claire coached Mr. Lancho how to use one of these to record him and his class in the classroom. Just being as economical with our money as we can be, the best value in radio. And I think the series just had an impact, and we know from our listeners that they did, and our podcast numbers went up, and it's just, I think, it's the kind of journalism that I think really stands out in the public radio landscape that we're doing.
Yes.
You guys are really slow on Slido. We are
nobody has questions.
Normally,
that boring.
Normally we're like we're inundated.
We got to put them in through the slide.
Got to put them in through there. Oh no, Stephen is just getting. They're just coming in now. Thank you, Stephen. He was keeping me in suspense. This one just came in. Clearly you are very prepared for your show. Was there ever a live show that, despite all of your preparation, totally went off the rails?
I mean, it depends on what we mean by off the rails. We've had guests just not show up.
Yep.
Which kind of is terrible for a live show. We've had guests be late and not show up. So then we just have to, if they're late, we figure something out. We go to another person or not. But if they just do not show up and we have no one else in that hour because it's a one-on-one interview, then we have to put something else on the air. But in terms of off the rails, I think what you want to know is, like, was a guest ever really super difficult, or did they say things that we didn't expect? What do we do? That actually happens pretty infrequently. Because we don't do a lot of deliberately argumentative conversations. I've left that behind in terms of the kind of journalism that I think I can contribute to. But sometimes what happens is people will say something that they didn't tell the producer beforehand. It's completely new information. So that's not necessarily off the rails, but it's a surprise. We have had one or two times where a guest, in terms of, like, there was one time we were talking about, we did a show about the anniversary of the beating of Rodney King. And we had his lawyer on. And this was live. And his lawyer quoted what the LAPD were saying as they were brutalizing King, quoted it word for word, so it contained terrible racial epithets. And it was live, and his lawyer, a black man, said it. And usually this is not a word we would ever let leave the studio. We're actually on a 10-second delay in order to just sort of like cut out in case things like that happen. But it happened, and he repeated it over and over again because he was verbatim quoting the LAPD. And so that was one of those moments where it did go off the rails. But instead of cutting that out, what we opted to do is I said to all the listeners, everyone hearing that episode, I was like, I'm really sorry, because that word is a brutal, dehumanizing word. We usually wouldn't let it on. But in this case, A, I didn't know, I was transparent about it. I was like, I didn't know this was happening. We're live. But B, it's also what the police said. And for those of us who either aren't old enough to remember or have forgotten, that was the circumstance under which the riots in LA happened afterwards. So that wasn't off the rails so much as...
It was a difficult moment.
A difficult moment.
I'd been executive producer for about a month when that happened, and I can remember the producer wanted us to bleep it, and I didn't,
the rebroadcast,
because I thought a black man saying that word, knowing he was on the air, repeating what the police had said to Rodney King, it would have been censoring not to hear that word. And I think we made that call for the right reason. have you ever scrapped a show and gone live for a breaking event?
I'm only thinking in a previous iteration of On Point that happened all the time. But a couple of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago now, we decided to actually change the format of the show pretty radically. Longtime listeners will know it used to be a 2-hour call-in show. Now it's a 1-hour, like much more deeply researched and produced program. And so for that reason, we don't necessarily do shows that are on that day's breaking news. We very deliberately wait a few days to see sort of what precipitates out of the first few days of coverage around an event. Because then we can say, okay, what questions haven't been answered? What are some of the like deeper issues that this event raised that we need to know more about? That's kind of our approach now. So which means that we don't frequently scrap everything and go live. The one time that we did that was January 6th. We had just come off the air, and I just talked to William Cohen, former defense secretary, about the state of American democracy. And so instead of doing playing that back again at 7 o'clock at night, which is when I know a lot of you hear the show, we did a completely live show that night. So that was one. And then other than that, if there's something that major has happened, I think 1 or 2 times we've changed what our show is and put a rerun on so it doesn't feel like we're talking about an issue that's so far removed from the moment that it doesn't make any sense.
I think the value is the depth that we bring,
yeah.
not necessarily kind of being reactive. It's being relevant is the way I think of it. And this is this question addresses one of the things that I think is one of the things I really love about On Point. How do you balance between reporting on the moment and attacks on democracy versus covering the science, economics, health, and other topics we're used to? I think she's looking at me because she wants me to answer that question. Or do you?
I mean, we should probably both answer that. How do we balance it? We have basically in our minds like 4 or 5 buckets of major sort of transformative issues that we return to over and over again. Democracy being one of them. AI is another. What else? Race. There's inequality.
What we call the human condition.
Human condition. So these are our buckets. And how do we balance that? Well, on one respect, like we don't, except in extraordinary times, we don't necessarily want to do 5 shows in a row about democracy, although I know some people probably want us to. So we try to look across a whole week, right? Yep. I mean, that's a lot of the sort of intellectual work that Jonathan does, is sort of figure out like how are we giving enough time to the issues that we think matter most.
I feel programming the week a bit like I used to when I was programming The World, which was a magazine show with 10, 11 items. You don't want them all to be about the same thing. And I feel the same way about programming the week. Yes, are we doing shows about democracy, but then also are we could do a show about how the Trump administration is changing this country every single day, but we'd be missing a lot of other stories, a lot of other issues that On Point could bring value to. And so I think, what are the other stories that we should be doing, that we could be doing? I'm also thinking of listeners wanting that range of topics that they get from On Point. I'm also thinking of, frankly, our producers and Meghna, and just wanting to think about the richness of their experience of producing this particular show. What does a day in the life of the show or Meghna look like?
I'll give you my very brief day in the life. It's interesting. The morning I am in full mom mode, trying to get children out the door. And so that is 100% what I'm doing. And then at 8 o'clock, we have a quick phone meeting to just discuss any last minute changes or things we need to know about that day's show. And then I eventually make it to the office. And there's like a flurry of last minute editing for scripts, etc. And we do the show at 10. That's when
you hear it at 11.
You hear it at 11. We actually record it at 10 because some stations carry us at 10 a.m. live Eastern. But BUR has it at 11, so that's totally fine. There's stations across the country that put us in various parts of their day. So we do it first from 10 to 11, and then after that we have our big editorial meeting, which is at 11:30 every day. That's like the heart of our show, and it's the beating heart of our day. And then depending on what's coming up next, in my life, what I'm doing is I'm doing the research from the packet. I'm absorbing that the producers have given, or I'm editing a piece that's going to go for 2 or 3 days or whatever. But then in the mid to late afternoon, I'm back in mom mode. Total transparency. I appreciate the flexibility that I have in my working day. So back in mom mode. And then when the evening winds down, then I return to prepping, reading, doing research, sort of filling in blanks in my understanding. And then we do it all over again the next day.
Yeah, and sometimes editing too.
And sometimes I'm a late night editor.
Yeah, very late night editor. It's not unusual for you to wake up in the morning to find a Slack message from Meghna from the wee hours. Finished editing, here's the script. Just time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. How do you feel about all the misinformation out there, especially when people only have time for clickbait?
I hate it. I mean,
who doesn't hate it?
Yeah. Let's see it's okay. Profoundly unfortunate is a light way of putting it, but it's also a fact of our lives. So there's misinformation in terms of sort of accidental velocity for poorly reported facts following a major news event. That's misinformation. It's the disinformation that I think is a toxin in not just our democracy but globally. What's interesting is in terms of how has it changed or had an impact on how I view On Point. One thing it has done is we actually spend a little bit more time now in almost every show just defining terms. I frequently will start by saying, okay, so, so-and-so, we're going to talk about this. First, I actually did it last night with Jake Sullivan. I'm like, I asked him, how do you define national security? I need to know how you understand it so that we can go from there. So it's almost like getting back to real basics so that we have a common set of definitions and facts to work from. So that's kind of a little thing that I think it's added to what I think is important in every hour. But other than that, how do I feel about it? I think it's terrible and a poison in our civic and democratic system.
And one final question. Who is the president of Indonesia?
Oh my God! Well, it's no longer Yudhoyono, I can tell you that. I actually do not know who the current president of Indonesia is. But if I ever have to pronounce this person's name, I promise you I will work as hard as I can until I get it right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming.